All right, welcome back to the channel. Derrick James, who should be trainer of the year in boxing if Errol Spence Jr. fights Danny Garcia, lights into Terence Crawford's resume in an interview with Marcus Villegas and points out something about his resume, dude, that I have never heard anybody explain that clearly. The Terence Crawford's resume looks like he's a prospect. Absolutely hilarious and true at the same time. And he says that Terence Crawford has the weakest resume of everybody on the pound for pound list. And once again, that ain't nothing but the truth. Let's talk about but I think that does come into play a little bit in whether or not that fight is going to get made. But let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So before we get into the meat of this, there is a couple different phases of a boxer's career, right? One is when you're a prospect, one is when you're a contender, and another one's when you're a champion, right? And then there are some things in between, like gatekeeper. Is a gatekeeper really is a contender really a gatekeeper, right? Is a bum really, are you really a prospect, or are you really just food getting fed to people? Whatever, but you get the point. The ones that I'm covering for the sake of this conversation are prospect, contender, and champion. And Derrick James analyzed Bud Crawford's resume and said they are still matching this guy like a prospect. So, and that he has the weakest resume in all of the pound for pound list. That all might be true, but Bud Crawford can still fight, and I most definitely still want to see this fight. But what Derrick James said really cannot be argued, okay? It's just so spot on. And it's something that you see happening consistently at Top Rank, but I personally never had the words to describe it. The way that they are continually having fighters fight guys that you know that they're going to beat. They're either, and they may have good names, but they're washed up, or, you know, they're 2 years past their prime, 3 years past the prime, or whatever. Similar to like the way Vasily Lomachenko was fed to Teofimo Lopez, and many people, including myself, predicted that they would win that fight because of the way that, you know, now that you have the old champion, being fed to the prospect. And now Teofimo Lopez is no longer the prospect. He's now the champion, and Vasily Lomachenko is no longer the champion. He's now the gatekeeper, right? That's a system set up within Top Rank, but you never actually wind up seeing two guys who are at the best of their ability fight each other, because they're not treating these guys like champions. They're treating them like prospects, people to be continually built up and hyped. That's what you do to prospects. You put them in matches that can help them build their skills and allow them to win and look good at the same time, which will increase the interest of the boxing fans. If you look at Terence Crawford's career, that's what Terence Crawford has been. It's the lead in, and we're still waiting for the big event, right? Like, okay, you've had 3 or 4 fights. Now I'm sure at welterweight, we're going to see you fight a big fighter, right? No, you're not. You're going to see 3 years. It's been 2 years at 147 pounds, and Terence Crawford still has not fought a top guy at 147 pounds, right? Just has not happened. I don't think that he's really fought a top guy in his division since probably, like, if number one, at 140, there was no real top guy at 140. There just wasn't anybody there at the time because Danny Garcia left. And at 135, there really wasn't anybody there at the time because Adrian Bronner left, right? So you were left with a bunch of fighters that look like, you know, like we're just trying to continue to build up Bud until we can really get that major fight for him, which we can consider to be the championship fight. And what championship fight is that? That's Errol Spence Jr., that's Manny Pacquiao, right? But what has Bud been doing? Bud is 33 years old, and he's been waiting for that fight for 8 years, right? 8 years of being treated like a prospect and never getting the big champion. And if you don't believe me, just do this. Get rid of all the secondary belts, get rid of all of that nonsense, and you'll see. And get rid of multiple, like all but one belt in that weight division, and you'll see. Dude, these guys are not fighting for championships. These guys are fighting like contenders. Just fights to keep your interest, and eventually, you know, with the hopes that eventually you'll get a real fight. And I think that is the true statement about what's going on with Terence Crawford and Bud. I mean, with Bud over there at Top Rank. I don't believe necessarily any fault of his own, except for the fact that he signed there. But the thing still remains the truth. And when Derrick James talked about Kell Brook specifically, dude, he was like, talked about Kell Brook like this. Like, first of all, Kell Brook, he said Kell Brook he thought looked good because he was landing the punches. But what Derrick James said was, it's not about what you're doing when you're landing the punches. What happens when somebody hits you, right? And so he was like, once Terence Crawford hit him, the fight was over because the guy was already shot, right? And because he was already worn out. And Bud and Derrick James said they had to know before the fight the guy was shot and that he couldn't take any shots. And that's what I think that they mean by shot. Like, you can't take any punches. Like, if you get hit, you're going because you've been so damaged before. And with the, this is Derrick James' take on it. I know what I said before the fight, but you can't get rid of the fact that the guy did have 2 surgically repaired eyes, right? Because he had cracked 2 orbital bones. And the first time that Kell Brook got hit in the face, Kell Brook ducked up underneath the rope like, no, don't hit me there again. And Bud was starting to tag that eye. And that was pretty much it. However, I said that I believe that was the least acceptable fight that you could get from Terence Crawford, and I would accept that fight. But it still is kind of like what Derrick James is saying, or not just kind of like it. It's exactly what Derrick James is saying. That is a fight like, for example, there's a prospect named Jaron Ennis. When we're looking for who Jaron Ennis is fighting next, we're having a lot of back and forth conversations about, now I'm not on Jaron Ennis's camp, obviously, but I'm saying just within people who are supporters of Jaron Ennis and watching him come up. People will say, hey, Fanon, do you think he's ready for this guy or that guy or this guy or that guy? And I say, yeah, like, for example, I think he's ready to fight Terence Crawford. Like, I think he'll give Terence Crawford a better fight than Kell Brook did or anybody else did for sure. And he has all the skill sets to beat him, but I would like to see Jaron Ennis in there with somebody like a Kell Brook, right? Somebody probably is too shot to beat him, but he can give him some looks and give him some things that he's not seen before, right? So I would say don't give Jaron Ennis to Terence. Don't put Jaron Ennis with Terence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. yet. Put him in there with, I don't know, Danny Garcia, if Danny Garcia loses to Errol Spence, right? Because that is the next level for Jaron. You think Jaron can beat him, but Jaron has to step up there. But that's us treating Jaron like a prospect, right? Somebody who needs to see multiple styles before he's ready to get to the big guy. Well, Bud has been doing that his whole career, and Errol Spence Jr. has not. Errol Spence Jr. is not conducting himself like a prospect. And you can say what you want, but that Kell Brook was the IBF champion, and prospects don't go all the way over to the UK to fight a guy in his backyard in front of whatever many people, 30,000 people, right? In a prospect type of situation. No, he went to go get the championship from that guy. Kell Brook, 3 years later, to Terence Crawford, looks like a guy you would feed to a prospect. So it's just, man, dog, it's just so obvious, dude, that like, what goes on with Top Rank, man. Now, again, I don't believe that this is a thing with Terence Crawford himself, and I think Terence Crawford is sick of it because you can hear what his sister Letitia said. It's like, look, we keep waiting. We're being patient. You keep saying we're going to get the fight. We're going to get the big fight. We're going to get the big fight. We don't get the big fight. When is the big fight going to happen? You say you're putting this on pay-per-view, but you're putting this on pay-per-view against guys that people don't really want to see. Well, what are you doing? That's a prospect type of fight. When you know the guy is going to win. Jeff Horn, come on, man. Jeff Horn you knew that outcome of that fight. It was for a belt, but cool. Jose Benavidez, you knew the outcome of that fight. Amir Khan is perfect for a top prospect. He's got a big name, and you can knock him out spectacularly. Imagine if Jaron Ennis got the Amir Khan fight and laid Amir Khan out like that. People are like, oh, Jaron Ennis, that's the next guy. Why? Because that's a prospect fight. It's a prospect fight. Terence Crawford's next fight will be a prospect fight, other than the mandatory fights, right? So Jaron and the championship, the actual one where he won the belt. But even those guys are not that level of competition. Terence Crawford needs to fight the top guys in his weight division, because that pound for pound argument that Derrick James said also makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at Errol Spence Jr., right? Now, I may disagree about, say, Gennady Golovkin. I do believe that Canelo Alvarez's resume is better than Gennady Golovkin's, because Gennady Golovkin's, I thought, lost twice to Canelo Alvarez. And other than that, he ain't got no wins. So I think that Derrick might be a little bit off on that, but hey, not too far. But that's my take on the matter. You let me know what yours is. And with that, I'm out. Peace.